Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Today we're tackling a topic that I know a lot of you are curious about.
Yeah.
The future of the U.S. dollar.
We're going to be checking out this YouTube video that one of you sent in.
Okay.
It's called The End of the U.S. Dollar, What You Must Know by Andrei Jikh.
So is the dollar really on its way out?
And what does that mean for us?
The big question.
Big question.
It's one that a lot of people are thinking about,
Yeah.
especially now.
Yeah.
With all this talk about global power kind of shifting.
Mm-hmm.
What I find really interesting is how much the U.S. dollar impacts our everyday lives
Yeah.
without us even thinking about it.
Right.
You know,
So before we jump into all the doomsday scenarios,
could you break down like what makes the U.S. dollar so special in the first place?
why aren't we all just using our own local currencies when we're trading internationally?
Yeah, you're talking about the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency.
Right.
It's basically the preferred language of global trade.
Okay.
Think of it like this.
Like you're building a house.
Okay.
You need a solid foundation, right?
Right.
That's what the dollar is for international trade.
It's stable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's reliable.
So it makes it easier for countries to do business with each other.
Right.
Without having to worry about those constant exchange rate fluctuations.
So is that why we see prices in dollars,
Mm-hmm.
even for things that are made in other countries?
Yeah.
It all goes back to that stability.
Exactly. And that stability has a ripple effect, too.
Because the dollar is seen as a safe bet.
Mm-hmm.
Global investors,
They're drawn to U.S. assets.
like treasury bonds.
Okay.
It's like parking your money in a vault everyone trusts.
Right.
Countries with big economies like Japan and China and the UK.
They hold a lot of their reserves in U.S. dollars.
I see.
And this video mentions something called the petrodollar,
Oh, yeah.
which sounds kind of powerful.
Yeah. So after World War II.
The U.S., they made a deal with Saudi Arabia
Okay.
to buy oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. And because Saudi Arabia was and still is a major oil producer,
This basically forced other countries to get U.S. dollars.
if they wanted to buy oil.
Wow.
So that deal really cemented the dollar's position at the center of the global economy.
So that one agreement basically changed how the whole world trades energy.
It's not that simple,
Okay.
but it definitely played a big role in making that dollar dominance stronger.
Right.
But this system
That seems unshakable.
is showing some cracks,
Uh-oh.
and that's where the concerns about the dollar's future come in.
Right. Andrei Jikh points to a few signs in the video,
Okay.
like the fact that countries are starting to form these alliances.
To reduce their dependence on the dollar.
Exactly.
He talks about groups like the BRICS nations,
Presumably with China.
India,
Mm-hmm.
and South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
which are major players on the world stage.
And they're increasingly doing business in their own currencies
It's interesting because the video also mentions that less than 20% of all currencies,
that have ever existed.
wow, are still around today.
That's wild.
Yeah,
That's a crazy statistic.
it is.
It suggests that even these seemingly powerful currencies,
Can rise and fall.
and we're seeing specific examples of countries trying to move away from the dollar.
The video talks about Iraq selling oil in euros, and China and Saudi Arabia.
Exploring this idea of a petro-yuan.
So, is the dollar's reign as the world reserve currency?
Actually coming to an end?
Well, it's not that straightforward.
Okay.
There's some strong counter-arguments to think about as well.
For example,
Okay.
despite all of these challenges,
The dollar's value has actually been increasing in recent years.
why is that?
I thought the whole video was about the dollar losing its grip.
Right, so that's where it's important to look at all sides of the story.
Okay.
The Federal Reserve
Which controls U.S. interest rates.
has been raising them
Mm.
to combat inflation
And this makes the dollar more attractive to foreign investors.
because they can earn a higher return on their investment. Remember how we talked about the U.S. being seen as like a safe haven for investment?
Right.
That perception hasn't gone away.
So even with countries looking for alternatives,
The dollar still has a lot going for it.
absolutely.
And it's worth remembering that the decline in dollar reserves that we saw a few years ago
Mm-hmm.
happened mainly during the 2008 financial crisis,
Right.
which was a time of global uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure.
So it makes sense that investors might have shifted their assets around.
So it could have just been a temporary reaction
Yeah.
rather than a permanent trend.
Exactly.
And while the use of the Chinese yuan is growing,
It's mostly happening at the expense of the euro and the Japanese yen.
not the U.S. dollar.
Okay, so it's more complicated than just dollar down, yuan up.
Precisely.
And that's why it's so important to look beyond the headlines
Mhm.
and examine all the details of what's happening.
Right.
What strikes you as the most compelling evidence so far?
Honestly, what stands out to me is how deeply entrenched the dollar is in the global system.
Yeah.
It's not just about trade and investment, it's about power, too.
That's a really important point.
The U.S. has been able to use the dollar's dominance as like a tool of foreign policy.
Right.
For example, they can impose sanctions on countries.
By basically cutting them off from the dollar-based financial system,
Right.
that's a powerful lever to pull.
Andrei Jikh talks about that in the video.
He says that the U.S. using the dollar as a weapon is actually pushing other countries to find alternatives.
That's definitely a factor.
Countries like Russia and China.
They've been pretty vocal about wanting to reduce their dependence on the dollar.
Because they don't want to be vulnerable to those kinds of sanctions.
It makes you wonder if the U.S. is kind of like shooting themselves in the foot.
By using it so aggressively?
Yeah, it's a valid question.
It's something that policymakers and economists are debating right now.
So let's say for the sake of argument.
That the dollar does eventually lose its reserve currency status.
Okay.
What could that look like?
What are some of the potential scenarios?
Well, Andrei Jikh outlines a few possibilities in the video.
One is that we could see increased inflation
Within the U.S.
as more dollars stay in the country.
That makes sense. If the dollar isn't being used as much globally, it could lead to an oversupply here at home,
Exactly.
and that could push prices up.
Right.
Another scenario is that we could see like a surge in commodity prices.
Particularly for things like gold.
Okay.
Some people believe that if the dollar weakens...
We could see a return to the gold standard.
Interesting, we haven't used a gold standard in decades.
Right.
And there's a lot of debate about whether it would even be feasible.
Well, desirable in today's economy.
The video also throws out this idea of hyper-Bitcoinization.
Could Bitcoin actually become a major global currency?
Yeah, it's a possibility.
It's one that some people are really excited about.
Bitcoin's decentralized nature makes it attractive to those who are wary of government control over currency.
But it's also like incredibly volatile.
Yeah.
I can't imagine using it to buy groceries anytime soon. Bitcoin's value fluctuates pretty wildly.
Which makes it risky for everyday transactions.
Right.
And it's still a relatively small market compared to the dollar.
So while it's fun to think about these dramatic scenarios,
It's probably more realistic to expect like a gradual shift
yeah,
rather than a sudden collapse of the dollar.
I think that's a reasonable assessment.
And it's important to remember that the dollar's future...
It's really intertwined with the future of the global economy as a whole.
Right.
There's so many factors at play.
That makes it even more important for us to understand what's going on.
So let's bring this back to our listeners.
Okay.
What does all of this mean for their personal finances?
What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, I think it highlights the importance of financial literacy. The more we understand about how the global financial system works,
The better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions.
right.
Andrei Jikh recommends a pretty straightforward investment strategy in the video.
Yeah.
Saving, investing in low-cost index funds.
And diversifying with Bitcoin as a hedge against the dollar.
Those are all really solid principles,
Index funds provide broad exposure to the stock market.
which historically has offered good returns over the long term.
Right.
And diversification is key to managing risk.
So even if you're not sure what the future holds for the dollar,
You can still take steps to protect yourself.
exactly.
It's all about being proactive and thinking long term.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. We've covered a lot of ground
From the history of the dollar,
to the potential implications of its decline.
is there a final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Something for them to ponder as they continue to explore this topic.
I think the most important thing is to stay curious.
The global financial landscape is constantly changing.
And there's always more to learn. So don't be afraid to ask questions
Challenge assumptions.
and do your own research.
That's great advice.
It's not about having all the answers.
But about being willing to explore and learn. That brings us back to that question you asked earlier.
If you had to pick one thing to invest in to prepare for a potential shift in global currency.
What would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
There's no easy answer.
It depends on your risk tolerance and your outlook on the future.
Some people might feel comfortable putting their faith in gold,
Right.
which has been a store of value for centuries.
Yeah, it's like the classic safe haven, right? People flock to gold when they're uncertain about the economy.
Exactly.
Others might be more interested in emerging markets,
Okay.
betting on the growth of economies in Africa or Latin America.
Those markets definitely have a lot of potential,
Yeah,
but they also come with more risk.
that's true.
And of course, there's the world of cryptocurrencies.
With Bitcoin being the most well-known,
Right.
some people believe that crypto is the future of finance.
Hmm.
and could eventually replace traditional currencies altogether.
Yeah, it's a fascinating space to watch.
Even if it's a little bit of a Wild West right now.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a Wild West.
I think the key takeaway here,
Is that there are many different ways to approach this question.
the best approach for you will depend on your individual circumstances
Right.
and your assessment of the risks and opportunities.
So it's not about finding the one magic bullet investment.
Yeah,
It's about being informed and making thoughtful decisions
exactly.
based on your own research and understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive.
Into this complex and timely topic.
It really has.
I think we covered a lot of ground here.
We did.
Thanks for guiding us through it.
My pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you for sending in this intriguing video.
And for joining us on this journey of discovery
We hope this deep dive gave you some valuable insights
into the future of the U.S. dollar.
and what it might mean for you.
Remember, the future is uncertain.
But by understanding the forces at play,
And making informed choices, we can all navigate the financial world.
with greater confidence and resilience.
Well, that.
Until next time, keep exploring
Keep learning.
and keep diving deep